It is Mock Draft Monday here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. You know what that means. Sayre Bedinger, myself, we cook up a 7-round mock draft as the Broncos are just about a week and a half away from the draft. How does the board fall for them? We'll break it all down here in today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Just a reminder, Broncos Country and all the everydayers out there, you can get this podcast for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team. It is Mock Draft Monday here on Locked On Broncos, one of our final two installments as we build up toward the NFL draft, which begins next week, where the Broncos will be on the clock at pick number 12 overall. So you know what that means. We launched the Pro Football Network Mock Draft Simulator as we kick things off in a 7-round mock draft. How does the board fall for the Denver Broncos? Well, let's dive into it right here, right now. We're going to stay put here for the Broncos at pick number 12 overall. Obviously, there are some trade offers that do come in for Denver, but we want to get this situation where, all right, we're going to sit still, see how the board falls to us. When you look at the first overall pick, as expected, Caleb Williams to the Chicago Bears, Drake May to the Washington Commanders, Jaden Daniels to the New England Patriots, and then the next quarterback that goes off the board ahead of Denver, 11th overall, the Minnesota Vikings select J.J. McCarthy. So, Sayre, here we are at 12th overall. We did an episode not too long ago here on the show where we really talked about if the Broncos don't go quarterback in round number 1 at 12th overall and the board falls to them, what players might they go with? If you look at the big board here, Georgia tight end Brock Bowers is available. Laiatu Latu, edge rusher out of UCLA, who we talked about, is available. Talise Fuaga out of Oregon State, offensive tackle, is available. Jared Verse out of Florida State is available as well. Quinion Mitchell, who was mocked by Mel Kiper not too long ago, is also available at that position. Where do the Denver Broncos go here, Sayre? Because right now, when you look at the top from 9 to 24, really there is no quarterback available in terms of the big board of consensus best players. Where are we going here? I will let you do the honors of picking our first round pick here for the Broncos.
Big responsibility here. Okay, so I think we see typically, Cody, when you look at some of the best experts out there who spend the most time watching these guys, Brock Bowers is probably most typically included among the top 10 players in this draft. And I think just on a general year-to-year basis, if you're able to get a guy who is generally a consensus top 10 player, and for Bowers, I mean, typically is in the top 6 or 7 guys. Let's just be honest. And what do people think of this guy? They think of a tight end and you think, well, I mean, why would you take a guy with a 12th overall pick who's only going to be getting you 50 catches and 600 yards and maybe 5 or 6 touchdowns a year? That's really not what Brock Bowers is. He's more of the guy that you're going to feature in your offense, 125, 150 targets, maybe more every single season. So my brain kind of leans there. I also like our discussion the other day about edge prospects for the Broncos. And I think that could be a discussion here with this selection if Dallas Turner is available based on those traits. And in this case, obviously, he went 9th overall to the Chicago Bears. So we don't have him there. Offensive tackles, there's still some really good players available. But look, Cody, I think Brock Bowers is a perfect fit in Sean Payton's offense. I think he's the best player available. And I think that's, if you don't feel convicted about a quarterback here, and there's got to be Broncos country, you got to understand there's a chance this team doesn't view Bo Nix as a first-round player. There's a chance this team doesn't view Michael Penix Jr. as a first-round player. And we have to explore those possibilities. So you know what? With the 12th overall pick, we're taking Brock Bowers. Who's going to throw Brock Bowers the ball? Doesn't matter, Cody. The Broncos get one of the best playmakers in the draft.
Well, now they got to go through, obviously, no round 2 pick in the 2024 NFL draft. So their next pick is 76th overall in round number 3. You get some trade offers there. We're going to ignore that here on today's episode of the show. So obviously, Brock Bowers, first round pick here. Denver's picking on the clock here, round number 3. You look at the big board right now of some of the best players that are available. Peyton Wilson, linebacker out of NC State's available. Chris Jenkins, obviously a defensive tackle out of Michigan. Leonard Taylor III out of Miami is available. Cedric Gray out of North Carolina is available. And then obviously there's some wide receivers here like Ricky Pearsall out of Florida, Jalen McMillan out of Washington, where you look at the Washington Huskies, they have a wide variety in this year's draft class of NFL draft prospects. And obviously we saw Rome Odunze go early on in round 1 to the New York Jets here. Where should we look at here for the Broncos in terms of where they're at? Because you look down the board there, you look at defensive tackle. There's obviously Mason Smith, who's popped up in several of our mock drafts. I feel like for Denver here, I might be a little bit unpopular in this thinking here, but we heard George Paton say it, Sayre, just not too long ago, about a week and a half ago, that the Broncos are looking to get more athletic at the inside linebacker position. I can't help but look at Peyton Wilson here, who obviously 6'3", 233 pounds. He's got a 9.89 RAS score. Some of his strengths, hyper elite explosiveness and long speed, and can cover absurd amounts of ground. Twitched up support linebacker who uses abrupt micro movements to sift through congestion. According to Pro Football Network's analysis about him, he's an alert coverage linebacker with great blind spot IQ, spatial awareness, and hip leverage, but his weaknesses has a lean and narrow frame with below average length. Lack of mass and inability to halt momentum allows runners to finish. Torn his ACL twice, suffered a season-ending shoulder injury in 2021. He'll also be a 24-year-old rookie at the start of the 2024 NFL season. All that information there. What are your thoughts if we were to go Peyton Wilson here at the linebacker position, 76th overall here for Denver?
Well, obviously the Broncos, they took a linebacker in a very similar spot last year with Drew Sanders. And so I think,
Yeah.
you can't discount this as a real possibility because of what George Paton has said, because of the fact that there may be a chance that Drew gets shifted to the edge position on a full-time basis. And so it's a realistic possibility, to be honest with you. Like, and we have to consider all possibilities, right? And so there's athleticism galore with Peyton Wilson. There's playmaking, and people say if he had, if he was a little younger, he might be a first round prospect in terms of the upside long term there. But the injuries are really why you could see him drop to this point, and that injury history, the knees, the shoulder, that's something to consider here, Cody. But I think in terms of getting more athletic at the linebacker position, I think any team that takes Peyton Wilson, I mean, there's not many more athletic linebackers than him in this year's draft. And maybe that experience over, having spent longer at the college level, maybe that could help translate to some instant viability at the NFL level.
It also feels like a little bit of a risky pick here as well, if we're talking about it, considering that, they do have Alex Singleton, Justin Sternad, Jonas Griffith. They just brought in Cody Barton as well. I'm going to pivot here. I feel like we need to address defensive tackle. I'm going to go with Chris Jenkins here for this pick, Sayre. Obviously, a 76 overall for him. RAS score of 9, weighs 200, almost 300 pounds, 299 pounds, 6'2". Some of the strengths on his scouting report say he's a freak physical talent with brute strength, power, and tenacity, maximized by leverage. Elite lateral explosiveness helps him get to a spot quickly, maintaining position. I mean, we can still make the argument Denver needs to get better at defensive tackle, even though they did with Malcolm Roach. But Malcolm Roach isn't going to be an every down player. You have a combo of Chris Jenkins, Malcolm Roach. I actually kind of like that. I'm going to lean here, defensive tackle. I'm going to go with Chris Jenkins from Michigan for the Broncos at 76th overall here. And look, Broncos Country, we continue our conversation on today's episode of the show. We're going to get into the Broncos' 4th round draft selection, where they're going to be on the clock at 121st overall. You're going to get that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos. Today's episode of Locked on Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors, they have you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Once again, that's ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
The Denver Broncos passing on quarterback with their top 2 picks in the 2024 NFL draft. Look, Broncos country, it might be Jarrett Stidham time. It might be time to start thinking about retired quarterbacks at this point and bringing somebody out of retirement, because the Broncos, if they do pass on quarterbacks in the first 2 days of the draft, Cody, that would be signaling big time that they're confident in Jarrett Stidham starting this coming season. But we're assembling a solid draft class so far. How is it going to continue here as we enter the 4th round of Mock Draft Monday after picking Brock Bowers and Chris Jenkins with back-to-back picks? Cody and I are going to continue this mock draft. I want to say thank you and give a shout out to all of you that make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Or if you watch on YouTube, hey, you can see who we pass on as well in these mock draft scenarios. We won't go through every single player that's passed upon. But you know what, Cody? I think so far we've made 2 really good picks. Brock Bowers, one of the best offensive weapons in the draft. He's going to make any quarterback better defensively. I mean, Sean Payton coached against Chris Jenkins' dad for a while there in New Orleans when Chris Jenkins was dominating for the Carolina Panthers back in the day. So he's going to preach, I bet, about that pick if the Broncos make it. I love improving the defensive line. You make the defensive line better this year. I think you raise the floor of the entire team. Let's go to round 4 here. Pick number 121 overall. What direction do you think for this pick, Cody? Because I like if you go tight end or wide receiver with the first round pick, you get a playmaker, you start assembling that talent there, you go defensive line in round 3. Now the Broncos, the options are they're just open at this point. You've committed. We're not building around a quarterback in this class. You've now committed to something else. Who are the quarterbacks available? Who are the best players available here that you're looking at right now in this simulation?
Well, when you look at quarterbacks available, there's not a lot of great options to pick from. I mean, there's Joe Milton out of Tennessee. I'm not on board. Like, I would not be a fan of that pick if that were the case for Denver. I mean, there's Austin Reed out of Western Kentucky. There's Carter Bradley out of South Alabama. There's Sam Hartman out of Notre Dame. But these are guys that aren't necessarily going to be viewed as players who are going to come in and eventually start for you. Though, I mean, there is a chance. But I think Brock Purdy is always an anomaly. I think everyone's going to we're going to start hearing every year in the NFL draft, who could the next Brock Purdy be? And essentially for those late round, obviously even just Mr. Irrelevant, but late round draft picks at the quarterback position. Not necessarily the quarterback there. We look at running back as well, because we've talked about Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine, both guys entering a contract year. Jaleel McLaughlin, an undrafted rookie free agent who's a little undersized but is explosive. Part of me wants to look here at the running back position now. And in one of the mock drafts we did last week, we got Jalen Wright out of Tennessee, which was a great pick for the Broncos. Vaki Irving, who I've had a chance to watch. Obviously, if Broncos Country, you've been scouting a little bit of Bo Nix and you've watched some Oregon games, you know exactly what Vaki Irving brings to the table. A guy who's very elusive, explosive, runs through contact as well. I kind of like that pick there as an option for the Broncos. Then you also look at maybe wide receiver. Who's available? Really, Brennan Rice of USC, Jamari Thrash out of Louisville, Malik Washington out of Virginia, Luke McCaffrey from Rice. We've already gone the Luke McCaffrey route here. So I don't know if we necessarily want to go with the wide receiver position here. Tight end, Jared Wiley out of TCU, Jaheim Bell out of Florida State. Do we want to go offensive line and maybe get a tackle prospect? I don't know if the Broncos view any of these guys here as potential options for them, especially they are at in round number 4. So, Sayre, what position should we go? I feel like I'm going to give you the pick here on today's episode of Locked On Broncos, and when the Broncos are on the clock at 121st overall.
You know what? You and I have talked about double dipping at this position before. I think I saw LSU defensive lineman McKai Wingo still sitting there, Cody, and I think he would be a nice value at this pick. He's a little undersized, but man, when it comes to impacting in the pass game, he is one of the best in this class. I think if you could get Chris Jenkins and McKai Wingo on top of already having signed Malcolm Roach this offseason, that right there, I'd be given a standing ovation. So if it's up to me here, I'm taking McKai Wingo, the D lineman out of LSU.
All right, that'll be the pick for the Broncos, 121st overall. They'll next be on the clock here, round 5, number 136. Now we're looking at some of the available options here. I think we can also take a look at running back once again. Okay, Jalen Wright is still there. I'm having a very, very hard time here looking at Kyrie Jackson still available, cornerback out of Oregon here. And look, I know people are going to say, oh, Cody, you're an Oregon Ducks guy. But I watched a lot of Kyrie Jackson, obviously a former Alabama Crimson Tide cornerback as well, transferred to the University of Oregon, can play press man-to-man coverage. And I think will add to, the ceiling of the Broncos cornerback room. I think this type of pick would come in right away, would compete with Riley Moss, would compete with Damari Mathis for a chance to start here. Sayre, my finger is getting a little itchy here. I think I'm going to go with Kyrie Jackson here. Start off this mock draft, kind of go through and see where things are at, especially addressing maybe cornerback depth here for the Broncos. How do you feel about it?
I like that pick a lot. A guy with big size, pretty good athleticism, could come in and make a instant contribution on special teams as well, especially if Riley Moss is increasing his role up to the starting defense. You're going to need to replace some special teams ability. So I like the idea of Kyrie Jackson. I think you pull the trigger on that pick and you make sure that you have that depth at the cornerback position. We know George Paton historically has averaged 2 defensive backs or more every single draft that he's had with the Broncos. So I think Kyrie Jackson, I think that's a good pick here at the top of round 5 for the Broncos.
All right, well, we're going to go with Kyrie Jackson here. And look, back-to-back cornerbacks taken here so far in the 5th round. Obviously, the Broncos starting everything off there. They go with Kyrie Jackson. And then the New England Patriots, Mike Sayre Bedinger. I think I said that right. Obviously, the cornerback out of Michigan. And then Denver's obviously on the clock here. round 5 picks here for Denver. Next up, 145th overall. When we look at overall needs that the Broncos have addressed, defensive tackle, we've double dipped there. We've gone through a cornerback here to the mix for the Broncos. You look at some of the players that are still available. Look, Jalen Wright, running back out of Tennessee, still available in this situation here. When you look at that, or you look at wide receiver, Sayre, where do we feel like the Broncos should go here? I feel like offense is probably going to be the move here. Running back, wide receiver, is there another position you feel like we should take a look at here, 145th overall?
I think you just kind of look at, the guy who has maybe the most upside to contribute right away in some form or fashion, right? Whether it's special teams, whether it's on offense or defense. I like this idea, Cody. I saw the Broncos they're doing a pre-draft visit with Ray Davis, the running back out of Kentucky, who's sitting there on the board. And as you talk about, picking up a running back, I feel like that's something that the Broncos will definitely be looking to do, maybe even a little earlier than this in the draft, maybe as early as that 3rd round pick, whereas that's kind of where I feel like Jalen Wright's going to be going, Cody. I know that the mock draft simulators, we talk about the volatility there, but Ray Davis, listen to these numbers from last season at Kentucky. He's transferred from Temple to Vanderbilt to Kentucky, found a niche there at Kentucky this past season, over 1,100 rushing yards, 5.7 yards a carry, 14 rushing touchdowns, but on top of that, 33 catches for 323 yards and 7 receiving touchdowns. So 21 touchdowns from scrimmage. The Broncos are getting a closer look at him. Obviously, when you're bringing guys in for visits, it could mean something, could mean nothing. But when you're talking about later round guys, I think these are kind of the all right, we need to make sure he checks off these boxes for us. We like him in the late rounds, or we like him as an undrafted guy. We're kind of getting ahead of the game in recruiting. I think here in round 5, Ray Davis would be a nice pick for the Broncos if you go running back.
All right. Do you want to go with that pick here, 145th overall?
Do it.
All right.
Let's do it. Let's take Ray.
Ray Davis out of Kentucky, and the Broncos back on the clock. Obviously, 2 picks later at 147th overall. What path are they going to take as they just in this mock draft simulator have 3 remaining picks? We'll break down those final 3 picks here on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at Monopoly Go. We've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friend's money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go will let you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone, anytime, with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do where you can play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. You can make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball, and you can charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Today's Locked On Broncos is also brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. And as you all know it, FanDuel, they are America's #1 sportsbook. And right now is the perfect time to get in on all the action because you have the NBA playoffs coming up, the NHL playoffs coming up. Baseball season is in full swing, pun intended there. And FanDuel is your place to bet on every game and every scenario possible. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. So bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks to who's going to win the first round of the play-in matchup to determine who's going to be the 8th seed inside the Western Conference, inside the NBA playoffs. Then you have all the action that's going on the ice in the NHL. You get that all on an app that is safe, that's secure, and most of all is super easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, the Broncos are on the clock in round number 5, 147th overall, with 2 picks remaining after that, a 203rd and 207th overall. We'll break down those picks on today's episode of Locked On Broncos. Real quick, wanted to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you so much for making the show exactly what it is. As we continue to go about here, looking at how this mock draft simulator is kind of falling to the Broncos here. I mean, there's interesting developments here across the board, right? I don't think Jalen Wright is going to be available in round 5. You and I've had this discussion. Does Denver need to go offense here? Do they need to add another guy to the defense? Like, where should they go? I think the one position we have not yet addressed or added to the mix here for the Broncos has been a wide receiver so far, though you can say their first round pick in Brock Bowers. He can be an all-around athlete, a receiver, tight end, whatever you may have there. Where should we go here? Part of me is feeling like we should add a receiver to the mix here for the Broncos in round number 5. And you look at some of the options that are available. Luke McCaffrey, obviously, name aside, he is available. He's the best available prospect so far, according to Pro Football Network's big board. There's Taj Washington out of USC. Where do you feel like we should lean here, Sayre, when we talk about the Broncos? I feel like wide receivers got to be the move here.
Yeah, I definitely don't mind the fact that you're sitting there and Luke McCaffrey's at the top of the wide receiver board. I think that just makes a ton of sense for the Broncos. At really, any point on day 3 of the draft for Denver, I think they could end up taking Luke McCaffrey. Just throw a dart at the wide receiver position on day 3, take a risk on a guy who's a really good athlete, a guy who could help on special teams, a guy who's played all over the place he takes the ball one way or another. He was a quarterback in Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
Ran all over the place with the ball there. So he's used to making plays in space, really good wide receiver development at Rice. So I like Luke McCaffrey for more reasons. I know that Broncos Country would just love to see a McCaffrey on the back of a jersey again. But at the same time, like, this guy's a really good player and he's an elite level athlete. So I would take a shot on his traits here, Cody, if I'm the Denver Broncos.
I would. 20 total touchdowns accounted for in the past 2 seasons at Rice. Not only was he prolific at the wide receiver position for them, but they also used him in rushing situations as well. He has production as an all-around athlete, which I look at Sean Payton. Not saying Luke McCaffrey is going to be the next Taysom Hill, but hey, you never know. There could be something in the works there. We're going to go Luke McCaffrey, 147th overall for the Denver Broncos in round number 5. Now, the next time that the Broncos will be picking is at 203rd and 207th overall here in the mock draft simulator. So with the Broncos now on the clock here, 207th overall here in round 6. Now this is kind of the time where you can maybe go in and get some guys that don't necessarily guarantee are going to make the 53-man roster, but guys you feel like, hey, can they come in and they can compete for a spot on the 53? I think there's some interesting options. We talk so much about the Broncos tight end room, obviously local ties here, Colorado State, Dallin Holker, maybe an option to consider here. Right now, you look at Denver's tight end room with Lucas Kroll, with Greg Dulcich, not them getting Brock Bowers. I don't think tight end is the move here for the Broncos. I don't think you need to add any more depth to that position, especially when you're more than likely going to bring in some undrafted rookie free agents. They're going to probably be on the roster as well to compete. You still have Lucas Kroll on the roster, who's obviously, in my opinion, going to have a very big role for Denver in 2024. Where we go here, I feel like the one position we have not added for the Broncos has been safety. I know, obviously, Sione Vaki out of Utah has been an intriguing name that you've brought up in some of our previous mock drafts in terms of consideration. These are the guys that you maybe want to add to positions where it's like, hey, can you compete? Delarian Turner-Yell, obviously, as we know, is not ready for the start of the regular season. Where should the Broncos go here?
I like the Sione Vaki idea, Cody. I mean, he's a versatile player. Sean Payton, we know, values versatility really highly in everything that he does. I mean, you talk about a guy who played both ways at the college level, running back as well as safety there for Utah. I think there's ways that you could use him on both sides at the NFL level. He's just a playmaker. Maybe the new kickoff return rules, maybe he gets some opportunities there. I like his upside on day 3, especially this late. I mean, that's certainly a risk that I'd be willing to take here. So if you're going safety, I think he's a good fit, somebody who could contribute for you in a variety of ways.
All right, we're going to go Sione Vaki, safety out of Utah, to help elevate the safety room, add some competition. You'll see a lot of him in the NFL preseason, and that for the Broncos will really kind of round out their entire draft here overall. And so I think when we look at where the Broncos are, wow, I guess the simulator actually screwed us over, Sayre, because it gave us a running back. We didn't even get a 203rd overall. It just automatically picked it for us for some reason. It gave us Blake Watson, running back out of Memphis. That's a wash. We'll just ignore that one. Overall here, Broncos country, looking at the widespread results here from this mock draft, I think for the most part, the top portion for Denver's mock, Brock Bowers, considering how the board fell to Denver, felt like a good pick here for Denver. Not just because he's not going to play tight end in line. He's going to play all over the field here, I think, for Sean Payton. You're going to see him lined up on the outside. You're going to see him lined up inside the slot. You're going to see him even lined up, I think, at times in the backfield with whoever the quarterback is going to be this upcoming season. Now, can you imagine here in a situation, right? You talk so much about it, and I think we had a lot of expectations in the past. Could you imagine Brock Bowers, a healthy Greg Dulcich, and maybe adding Lucas Kroll as your 13 personnel here for the Broncos offense? Like, to me, that gets me excited a little bit. It expands, I think, what you can do out of the passing attack, because a lot of times when Denver went 13 personnel last year, they really went run heavy because they had Chris Manhertz in and Adam Troutman. Now you go 13 personnel with Greg Dulcich, Lucas Kroll, and Brock Bowers. Now you have a multitude of different receiving options that you can run with here. I like that specifically for Denver to be really in the top-heavy portion. And obviously, we double-dip defensive tackle back-to-back, Chris Jenkins and Wingo. Let's talk about what that's going to look like, what that position room currently looks like for the Broncos. Zach Allen at D end. You're going to have DJ Jones at D end as well, who's obviously in the final year of his contract with the Broncos. Now you add Chris Jenkins, who's going to probably play alongside Malcolm Roach at that defensive tackle position, and McKai Wingo, who has some familiarity with Jamar Cain, can also play some defensive end here. I like kind of this path here for the Broncos with how the board fell in this situation.
I do too, Cody. I mean, I think that this is it's a balanced draft. And I think the elephant in the room is that we didn't select a quarterback. Even if we had been able to use that 203rd overall pick, which the simulator took a player for us, even if we'd been able to use 203 on a QB, like, is that going to move the needle for anybody? But I think with Broncos country, here's something to maybe think about with a class like this. Just imagine, since we didn't do any trades in this scenario, imagine the Broncos are willing to trade a future pick or two in order to move into round 2 for somebody like, Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., or maybe up into round 3 again for somebody like Spencer Rattler. I think you could envision this kind of a class in combination with Sean Payton making an aggressive move like that to take a shot on somebody, not to necessarily cripple your future draft capital by any means. But I think you combine a class like this with something like that, right, at the quarterback position, because I don't feel like the Broncos, Cody, I don't feel like they're going to punt altogether on quarterback this year. I think they're going to find a way to get somebody. But when you're working with a simulator like this, like, we can't just, we can't always just interject at a certain pick where a quarterback is falling. Things are moving so quickly. So I think for anybody that's going to jump in the comments and say there's no way the Broncos don't take a quarterback in this year's draft, like, this type of draft, this class right here, I think insert a QB dart at some point where the Broncos might be able to trade future capital to move in and get somebody that they like but maybe don't love.
I think you have to factor it in consideration. We always have to preface these. When we do these mock draft Mondays, folks, it's a fun exercise. It's not saying how we think the Broncos are going to go about the draft. We're not predicting it or putting our money on the line here essentially for it. We're talking about, like, these are fun hypothetical situations, right? And they're meant to be a fun exercise, not meant to be taken too seriously. But I think when we talk about how maybe this draft came out, I really like the Broncos overall first 6 picks in this year's draft based on the simulation. I like the Bowers. I like the Jenkins and McKai Wingo picks back to back. I like adding cornerback Kyrie Jackson out of the University of Oregon, and then adding Ray Davis, another running back, to the mix here for Denver is a good realm of possibility. Then Luke McCaffrey, who's got the potential to be an all-around weapon for the Broncos, could even have that. Like we say, we always talk about when Sean Payton, when's he going to trade for Taysom Hill? Luke McCaffrey, with his quarterback experience and use as an all-around athlete at Rice, could very well be used in a way that Payton used Taysom Hill in New Orleans. So not saying he's going to become the next one, but can maybe be used in that way here. Overall, Broncos Country, let us know what you thought of this mock draft simulation here on today's episode of Locked On Broncos. The buildup for the draft continues. We'll have one more mock draft Monday going into next week here, but stay tuned here, Locked On Broncos, all week long as we continue to dive deep into some players we think can break out, players who need to continue to bounce back, so on and so forth. We're going to look at specific position groups as well for the Broncos to address it going forward. You can get that and much more on tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.